In this video, I want to talk about Mirrodin block. The block has special significance for me because I started playing just as it came out, when I was all of about 7 years old. I was super into fantasy at the time, and I found myself gripped by the art and flavor text. But I think Mirrodin also occupies an important place in Magic's history. It's an influential and iconic set, combining both modern and old school design principles. So let's start off with some of the set's modern elements. First up, Mirrodin was the first block to utilize the new card frame, introduced a year earlier with the 8th edition core set. Prior to this, all Magic cards had used the classic frame, reminiscent of a page from a spellbook. This was a controversial change, as the old frame was widely beloved and had a lot of nostalgia value. So why did Wizards of the Coast change the frame at all? There were many reasons for the change, most of all legibility, as text on certain old frame cards was difficult to read. The new card frame was also more flavor neutral, which meant that they had less personality, but thus could allow the art and card mechanics themselves to get more creative. Mirrodin was thus the pioneering block for the new frame, also serving to highlight some of the frame's problems. For example, artifacts were too light in Mirrodin, making them hard to distinguish from white cards. This would be corrected in 5th Dawn. The mana symbols in the text boxes were also grayed out, an issue that would also fortunately be corrected. The second way in which Mirrodin broke ground in terms of modern Magic principles was that it introduced a new world. Prior to this, all Magic sets had taken place on the card game's signature world of Dominaria, a plane inspired by classic fantasy. However, starting with Mirrodin, the vast majority of expansions would be set on other planes, and the visiting of new planes with each set would become a crucial element of the game. The third way in which Mirrodin block was distinctly modern was in its mechanics. It introduced affinity, entwine, scry, imprint, indestructible, modular, equipment, and sunburst. With the exception of the latter, all of these mechanics were incredibly popular with players, even if affinity in particular was overpowered. For this reason, mechanics like scry and indestructible became evergreen, or at least deciduous. Equipment was particularly popular, immediately becoming a staple part of the game, and an inclusion in every set going forward. Equipment were a design home run, capturing the feel of tools, weapons, and armor that could be attached to creatures to make them more formidable. The fourth way in which Mirrodin block is notably modern is the fact that it's the oldest modern legal block. The modern format includes all sets released from 8th edition onward, making Mirrodin literally part of the dividing line between classic and modern Magic. On the other hand, there are many ways in which Mirrodin harked back to old school Magic. For example, many cards draw inspiration or explicitly reference powerful cards from the game's past, particularly iconic artifacts. There are obvious examples like Chrome Mox, which pays homage to the original Moxen, and Gilded Lotus, which is a black lotus with a reasonable mana cost. There are also slightly more obscure examples, like Grinding Station, which refers to Grindstone, Pentavis, which refers to Tetravis, Glimmer Void, which is an artifact version of Thran Quarry, Imperial Plate and Imperial Armor, Rule of Law is a color-shifted Arcane Laboratory, Mass Hysteria is a color-shifted Concordant Crossroads, Nightmare Lash is a fun wink to Nightmare, Blinkmoth Nexus is inspired by Mishra's Factory, Razormane Mastercore refers to the Old Menace Mastercore, Paradise Mantle is an equipment made from the feathers of Birds of Paradise, Acquire is an artifact version of Bribery, Engineered Explosives is a descendant of Powder Keg, And Volshock Sorcerer is a hasty, color-shifted prodigal sorcerer. Then there's also the cycle of replica creatures, each of which is an artifact that references an earlier creature of that type. Elf Replica is a steely take on Elvish Lyrist. Goblin Replica references Goblin Tinkerer, Toothy Grin and all. Nim Replica has the -1/-1 effect of Shambling Goblin. Soldier Replica plays on the damage-dealing ability of Elite Archers. And Wizard Replica is a riff on Daring Apprentice. Even the lines on the robot wizard's skull recall the background of Daring Apprentice's artwork. With all these references, particularly to beloved cards from an earlier era, the set designers seem to be telling the players, look, we still love and respect the Magic cards from the past. The game hasn't completely changed. Another way that Mirrodin feels old school is with its very high power level. So many cards in this block were incredibly strong, like Arcbound Ravager, which could turn artifacts into power at instant speed, to the versatile ramp of Chrome Mox, to the undercosted threats with affinity for artifacts. There's also Aethervial, a boon to creature-based decks, and Trinisphere, one of the most brutal prison pieces in Vintage. Oblivion Stone also continues to see play as a formidable board wipe in Tron decks. Then there were cards that were outright design mistakes, like Skullclamp, which could turn 1 toughness creatures into 2 cards drawn for a single mana. Ravager and Skullclamp were banned in Standard, while Chrome Mox, the Artifact lands, Krark-Clan Ironworks, Second Sunrise, Cloudpost, Mycosynth Lattice, and Seething Song remain banned in Modern to this day. This power level was a mixed bag. On the one hand, it was fun and exciting, and contributed to Mirrodin being the best-selling Magic set released up till that point. However, on the other, some cards were clearly broken, leading to an unhealthy meta dominated by a handful of overpowered decks, causing many players to quit the game entirely, at least for a while. The final point I want to look at in terms of what makes Mirrodin block great is its flavor. Mirrodin is a metallic world full of advanced technology and complex machines, yet it's very different from most alien planets or futuristic environments in fiction. This is because Mirrodin draws on fantasy influences rather than sci-fi. It's a high-tech world, but an analog one, with cogs, gears, and pistons rather than anything digital. There are no screens to be found here. The world of Mirrodin is also harsh. Everything is sharp, steely, and unforgiving, from the razorgrass fields to the twisted spires of the islands. It helps that so much of the art is fantastic. Some legendary artists contributed to the set, including John Avon, Donato Giancola, Mark Zug, Brom, Adam Rex, Carl Critchlow, and more. Their work gives this plane a distinct personality. Finally, there's the world building. There are novels telling the block's story, but most players won't have read them, instead gleaning the flavor and story of Mirrodin from the art, card mechanics, and flavor text. Magic's storytelling is unique in this regard, with images and snatches of flavor text conveying most of the story, with the player filling in the blanks themselves. The best example of world building through the Mirrodin flavor text comes in the artifact lands. Each of them represents an important location, with the flavor text explaining what the place is and why it's relevant. Taj-Na, throne of Raksha Golden Cub, destined leader of the Leonin Prides. Panopticon, forge of the Darksteel Eye, home of Mirrodin's keeper. Kuldotha, wellspring of molten metal, temple of the Goblin Horde. Lumengrid, site of the knowledge pool, source of Vidalcan Arcana. Tel'Gilad, sanctum of the ancient trolls, keepers of the secret of Mirrodin's origin. Ishsar, den of the warlord Geth, commander of countless Nim. Taken together, all these elements add up to a unique and iconic Magic set. Mirrodin block was flawed, to be sure, but it was also bold, creative, powerful, and boundary-pushing. As a result, it stands at a crossroads, looking back on Magic's past as well as ahead to its future, and its influence continues to echo throughout the game. Thanks for watching.